Hello and welcome to All the Fanfare. My name is Eric Pierce. Today we're talking about storytelling in video games. I've been on a big video game kick lately, and I've been talking to my friend Henrik Ståhl, who is a brilliant pop culture writer who primarily covers video games. Today we're going to talk a lot about video games, storytelling, where the two meet, what constitutes great storytelling in video games, and sometimes why you don't even need it. We're going to cover all kinds of facets of it, but first of all, I want to introduce Henrik to the podcast. Welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Eric. I'm so excited about this. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah. I am too. Henrik and I have been emailing back and forth for a couple months now, circling this topic, looking for a date that would work. And so we finally found it. And like Henrik, I'm super excited to talk about it because I love video games. They're so fun. I always thought I'd kind of grow out of video games at some point. I don't know, Henrik, how you feel about it, but when I was a kid, I assumed that by my 20s, surely by my 30s, I'd be done with video games. But here I am in my 40s, and I'm still playing video games. I still love video games because there's something kind of timeless about them, and even from a storytelling standpoint, there's something pure about the experience of gameplay that I just can't find anywhere else.
Myself, I'm rapidly approaching 40, and I still feel like I will probably never be too old for video games. It's almost like part of my DNA. I played video games like the first time. I can't even remember because I was like 3 years old. So this is what I've been told. Kind of, we had this sort of machine. I don't even know what machine it is, but it was a console with games built into them. So it was like 24. Probably very crappy games, but different kinds of games, and I would just play it, and I was so immersed in this. So when the character jumped, I would jump. The whole stereotypical kind of thing where you're actually playing physically with this device, and it's I'm kind of still there.
Yeah, absolutely. Both my brother and I, we rock when we play games. We'll just kind of rock back and forth. I'm now minding it. But we went home for our annual kind of go home and see the family kind of reunion type thing. And I brought my RetroPie, which has a bunch of classic games on it. And my brother and I hooked up in the living room. We sat in my mom's recliners and we sat side by side rocking as we were playing games because... And it's funny because that's what we did when we were kids, and it's what we're still doing now. And I guess when we're in our 80s, we'll be in literal rockers at that point playing games.
Yeah, exactly. Like my wife always tells me, like, she gets annoyed because she thinks like I look like quote dumbass because I make these funny faces and this kind of thing whenever, like, whatever I'm playing. I'm like, I'm so yeah. I'm so really into it, and I don't know if have you ever heard of the Bartle player taxonomy? Like these four.
I have not.
There's this guy, he categorized different types of gamers, and he basically categorized them into four main types. Those types are achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers. And achievers, they are very competitive. Of course, explorers, they enjoy discovering stuff. Socializers play games for social interaction. And the killers, they basically just want to watch the world burn.
Right.
But kind of, they thrive they thrive on competition and kind of dominance. So it's a little bit like the achievers, but so much over the top. And in the reason why I bring this up in terms of categorizing gamers and talking about us as gamers is because I am definitely an explorer. And the thing about
I am too.
And the thing about us explorers is also that we are often very immersed into kind of the game, and that's probably why or at least I can only speak for myself, obviously, but that's probably why I really enjoy story-driven games because I really like to get immersed into the game, really feeling like being not only being part of the game, but kind of being the person I'm supposed to control or whatever, being part of this world. So in order to be fully immersed into a game experience, that really requires a lot of suspension of disbelief. I also tend to kind of when I speak about games and what I like in games, I actually tend to say that I enjoy lore more than I enjoy story. Because obviously, yes, I love a great story, uh, regardless of medium. If it's a great story in in literature, in a book, or in a movie, or a TV series, or video game. But I'm more into like, yeah, lore. And to me, lore, that could be implemented in many different ways. You don't need a story at all in order to convey a message of lore. Those are kind of, yeah, they go very well hand in hand, but one doesn't require the other.
You just said a lot of things, and I'm trying to decide which one I want to jump into because there's a bunch of juicy topics I think that are ripe for the taking. I think the one I want to start with is you were kind of talking about your play style, and like you, I'm the explorer. And when I play games, like if I'm playing typically like a role playing game, and you're presented with several different paths you can go down, I'll try and I want to go down all of them to the point where if I start to go down one and it keeps going too long, I'll probably backtrack and go to the other ones because I want to make sure I see everything. So I
Yeah.
think maybe I accidentally found the main one, so I need to see the side ones first. I got to see everything. I got to find everything. But you're talking about how when you play games, you kind of lose yourself in the story, and it's almost a form of role playing where you're taking on the persona of the character, whether that's a Nathan Drake in Uncharted, or like Spider-Man in the Spider-Man games, or Skyrim, which I love, which I know you don't. But I'm curious, when you kind of play these story-driven games and you kind of lose yourself in the story, do you find that you enjoy games more where you're playing a role, you're playing a Nathan Drake, and you're going through kind of the story, which is very cinematic, right? Those games are set up so that they're almost like you're participating in a movie. Or do you prefer games that are less story structured, like a real role playing game, like maybe like a Baldur's Gate 3 or something, or a Skyrim, or just any role playing game where you're presented with options, Mass Effect, stuff like that, and then you're kind of through your choices are making the story happen. I think there's a clear divide there, and story can look different in different games. So I'm just curious, what is your preference, and kind of why do you think that you enjoy those types of games?
That's a really good question, and I really like the fact that you mentioned structure here, because that's also one thing I've thought a lot about. Like, generally speaking, I am more concerned with structure. So if the narrative benefits from a typical story, it should have one. If it doesn't, then it makes no sense to add a story. And that kind of like, if you have a story where it doesn't make sense, the story will just do damage to the whole experience, kind of. And you can incorporate lots of, like I said, with the lore, since lore entails storytelling, but it doesn't necessarily require traditional story heavy narratives. You can incorporate lots of lore without the story. And the thing is, I kind of, if we talking about like what I gravitate towards, is I do gravitate towards story driven games, or game series such as Final Fantasy. Two of my top three games of all time is Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 6. I just
Good choices.
yeah, I played, like, Final Fantasy 7 was the first proper JRPG, Japanese RPG I played back in 1997. And I just recently played, like, I recently finished the remake, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, because it's part 2 in a 3-part remake series. And I invested like 85 hours into, because I wanted to experience everything, just explore everything. But to me, with Final Fantasy in general, and Final Fantasy 7, also Final Fantasy 6, that's mainly the story. That's the key takeaway, like, because everything is built around story, or like the world building. And the story is such a crucial part of that world building. Like, without that story, Yeah, I mean, it would probably have like all of the gameplay mechanic. That's also the funny thing about Final Fantasy VII. It's so much gameplay, so many different kind
Hmm.
of mechanics. Even though it's also a traditional turn-based JRPG, um, but like if you didn't have that really heavy, um, dramatic, traumatic,
Yes.
tragic story, it wouldn't have been. A, a it wouldn't have been a great game. It would have been a good game, but it wouldn't have been a great
Yes.
game.
That's a really excellent point, and I think a lot of the reason why people hold up Final Fantasy VII as the best Final Fantasy and one of the their top 5 games ever or whatever is because of the story. It's the things that you experience, and a lot of that story happens. You're not even in control of the characters. You're just
Mm.
seeing what's happening to the characters, and then you kind of pick up the story. You pick up the gameplay, and but that's a great point, because when I think about my favorite memories of games, a lot of the times it's the story things that happened in the game. It's the trauma of Final Fantasy VII, and being like, oh crap, like I need to get revenge. Or it's when you're one of my favorite games ever is Red Dead Redemption 1, and I'm still to this day haunted by the way it ends for
Mm.
John Marston, where you're in the barn and you realize that no matter what you do, it's over. I replayed that
Yeah,
scene probably 5 times trying to take everybody out, until it dawned on me that there was no getting out of this. Like, I'm gonna die here, and that, like, it hit
yeah,
me in a way that, like, no death in a game has ever. By the way, spoilers, but no death in the game has ever hit me before, because it forced you to really reckon with what's going to happen, and that there was no way out of it, and
and that
you
soundtrack.
had it had to happen.
Yeah, and the soundtrack, like the song. I can't remember the name of the song, but it's they couldn't have picked a better song.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
it's so like I listen to it sometimes and almost cry because I can only
yes,
think about that scene listening
yes.
to that song, and that's really the power of great storytelling, and also the power of great lore. Because like if we're speaking of Final Fantasy VII, and also Red Dead Redemption, with a lot of story and a lot of those kind of narrative aspects, and then the best game of all times according to me is still The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Hmm.
uh like it's this almost 30. Is it 30? Yeah, it's 30 years
Yeah,
old.
pretty
Yeah,
close.
pretty close to 30 years old game. And it's obviously Zelda, like Ocarina of Time, or like Zelda, the Legend of Zelda series in general, and Ocarina of Time in particular. They do have a lot of story, a lot of
Hmm.
story elements, but they aren't necessarily story driven in the same way as Red Dead Redemption or Final Fantasy 7 or Final Fantasy 6. It's a different kind of storytelling
Yes.
where many people would argue, even Nintendo, even the Legend of Zelda developer team would argue that the mechanics and the gameplay is front and center, and then they have this story kind of, and it
Hmm.
almost sounds like, yeah, we need a story, so we just smacked something on, boom. But that's definitely not that's not even remotely true, because it's so much invested into the details of the whole, like, of the lore in Zelda. And even though, I mean, if you've ever tried to memorize, which I have done, by the way, I have memorized the timeline and the timeline splits and all of the different all of the weirdness going on in the timelines. Obviously they are a result of basically mechanics and gameplay being front and center, and story playing second fiddle. But still, there's so much detail, and so much attention to detail being put in there. So it's not like, oh, this is an afterthought. It isn't. When you look really close at it, it's oh my god, it's so intricate. And like, that's what I also like about the Legend of Zelda as a series, because even though it's not story driven the same way, they do incorporate a lot of these things, and in a lot of details where you can play it for multiple times throughout different years, and you still miss out on things. Like when I realized, for example, that in Ocarina of Time, when you become an adult, you meet this guy. You meet this guy called Shake. It turns out he's Zelda. It's
Yep.
not the biggest reveal in in the history of storytelling, but a really cool thing about it, and this I didn't realize this for many years, but the Zelda's lullaby, which is basically the theme of Zelda, that's Zelda's theme song. It's actually incorporated into Shake's theme song, because Shake also has a theme song. And it's right there. It's right there under So if you could just, if you would have spotted it the first time you play the game, it's like, but this is Zelda's lullaby. But it's so, it's so subtle, and so that's also part of lore. Or like in the Skyward Sword, where you have this Ballad of the Goddess, which is actually Zelda's lullaby in reverse. Like if you literally speaking, like if you literally turn it backwards, you get Zelda's lullaby. All of these kind of things, all of these little intricacies, it plays in for me into like that's why I invest so many hours in the Final Fantasy series and the Zelda series, because there's so much stuff to explore. And you can even theorize about things. That's also part of the storytelling, where you don't say everything. You don't get the full picture, you don't get the full story, but you get a lot of details, and then you're gonna puzzle it together. So I really love when I can play a game, and after finishing the game, I can start theorizing. That's the best.
Yeah, exactly. You're picking up on things that either the developer put there intentionally or put it there, but you're kind of extrapolating on what you're experienced, which is, it's what we do with movies and things all the time. You're kind of reacting to what you experienced and what you took in, and then you're just turning it around in your head, and you're maybe chasing it down paths that were never intended to follow, but it makes the whole experience deeper and more interesting. The other thing too is they were kind of dancing around with video games and storytelling. There's a sort of a conflict between the two. To your point, when you're talking about Zelda there, video games first and foremost have to be about play. They're games. You play them. You physically are moving your avatar through a digital world, and it has to be engaging in a way. The gameplay has to be somehow rewarding or fun. And if it's not, you'll never play it. You'll never experience the story, because you'll lose interest. Yeah. So storytelling in games, like the gameplay has to be paramount. I think sometimes if the storytelling is good enough, you can overlook maybe some less than ideal mechanics, because you're just so bought into the story. I've played games like that where I was kind of just playing for the next cutscene because the story was so good. With storytelling in games, there definitely is different variations. I mentioned cutscenes. There's definitely the games where it feels like the game is occurring between cutscenes. So like Red Dead Redemption's like this a little bit. The Grand Theft Auto series is like this. Uncharted's like this, where you are physically in control of your character. You're doing things in the world, and then you trigger something, and then a cutscene happens. And at that point, you're just sitting back and watching a cinematic, and you're no longer playing. And if it's good, if it's well done, if it ties into what you've done, you don't mind, you enjoy it. Sometimes those take over. I think I tend to prefer games where, to your point about Zelda, that storytelling is built into the experience of play and arises out of play, versus you just kind of sitting back and just kind of passively watching the story happen. I think that's my preference. It sounds kind of like that's the way you lean too. Would you agree with that, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, definitely. I have played a few, interactive novels, as they are called.
Yes.
Some of them, I do enjoy some of them, but it has to be really good. I played a game last year called Harmony, The Fall of Reverie, I think. It's basically an interactive novel where the only gameplay is that you make some choices in dialogue. The innovative thing is that you can actually see the whole tree of the story. Like you can see the branches, so you can kind of think, okay, so if I choose this, then I might go this path. So it kind of turns it on its head somewhere. Like you can almost see the end, and then you can sort of plot how to get there. It was quite interesting. I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it. I've played others that's like, the story has to be so engaging and the characters have to be so well written. You need so much that's at stake somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Because in some ways you can get away with a lot of shortcomings if you focus more on the gameplay. And I wanted to make an example out of this game called Animal Well. It was released earlier this year, developed by a single developer named Billy Basso. It's like a Puzzlevania, and I say Puzzlevania with quotation marks because technically speaking, it's a Metroidvania, but it revolves around puzzles instead of combat. Metroidvania is this kind of these kind of games focused on guided non-linearity and utility gated exploration and progression. So it has all of that. Like it's a pretty big, like it's a 2D like pixel retro kind of game, with a pretty big, like, yeah, I would say huge map, but you have to explore it like similar to other kind of Metroidvania. But instead of combat, it's a lot of puzzles, and this should be right up my alley because I really love puzzle games. Like I love Limbo, I loved Inside. Braid is one of my top 5 games of all time.
Love it. Yep.
Love those kind of games. Braid is also quite story driven in a way, but the thing with Animal Well is that there is no story whatsoever. There's very little like interaction with stuff. No explanations. Like you're this little blob in this world, and you're supposed to just, okay, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. Let's just go explore stuff. And then you have a lot of lots of puzzles in these rooms, and in some cases you go to a room and like, I have no idea what to do, so okay, I'm gonna go elsewhere. And then you go elsewhere and you find something. Oh, this thing might work in that other room I was in, like, hours back. Sometimes you get stuck and you just, okay, let's just explore here and see what I can find. And it's been quite it's been quite hyped. And I did finish it, but I didn't really enjoy it. Like the puzzles are fine, and the reason why it has been so kind of hyped is because it's like the puzzles are layered. You can go into a room and then you say, oh, okay, this is the obvious thing I'm supposed to do, and then you do that and then you progress. But then you can return to that room way later and realize, oh yeah, but if I do this, I can actually get up to this ledge here that I thought was just something, whatever. So there are layers to these puzzles, and in some rooms there are cats that are trapped in some cages, and okay, yeah, the animals trapped in cages is not something you're supposed to do, like, pay attention to right now, but later, yeah, that's part of another puzzle, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, it's complete lack of story and complete lack of lore kind of turns me off. It's like, because to me it's like, okay, the only purpose of this game is just to beat the puzzles. So when I figure the puzzles out, there's nothing else there. That's it, kind of. And
Sure.
in the other end of that kind of experience, like the opposite end, you have Thomas Was Alone from 2012, if you ever heard of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, I think it's a great game. Also created by a single developer, Mike Bethel, and he based the game on the concept of friendship. And he came upon the mechanics of using multiple blocks with different abilities as a means of representing this. So this is a super rudimentary game where you're basically these blocks of shapes, but very story driven. So without the story and without this kind of narration, it would have been a pretty bleak game, to be honest. I would say, at least. It's not like the gameplay and the mechanics isn't super interesting in a way, but the story is. So you could either see it from my point of view, you could either see it as the gameplay being enhanced by the story, or the story being traversed by the gameplay, if you know what I mean. So in
Hmm.
that sense, um, Thomas Was Alone without the story, really crappy game, I would say. Like the mechanics
Yes.
isn't really that interesting, but with the
Yes.
story, it's like, wow, this is magic.
That's a great point. And it reminds me of one of my favorite game experiences. I think it was in 2022. Are you familiar with Unpacking? It's a
Yes,
it's a
yes.
cozy game. I'll just describe. Okay, that's great. I love the experience. It's a cozy game where essentially, per the title, Unpacking, each level revolves around you moving into a new living space. And you're unpacking your belongings, and you have, closets and dressers, and per normal video game operations, each level gets harder. So each space you move into is bigger, and you got more stuff to unpack. So now you have to unpack, stuff for the bathroom, and now the next level you're also, in addition, unpacking stuff for the kitchen. And there's some very subtle storytelling that's happening there, because
Hmm.
the very first level you're unpacking into a little girl's room, and then shortly after that you're unpacking into her college dorm, and then shortly after that you're unpacking into her first apartment, and then there's a level where you unpack into her boyfriend's place. And the storytelling in that game is so, there's no exposition, there's no dialogue, there's no
Hmm.
text on a screen telling you what's happening. You're just literally moving things around and being like, okay, this will fit in this drawer and this needs to go in those hangers. But then as you do it, your mind, it's because it's kind of a meditative thing, your mind just starts wondering, and it's, your mind is putting these pieces together, and like, okay, she graduated college, now she's with this guy. And that experience specifically about moving into the guy's apartment,
Hmm.
it kind of like traumatized me in a way, because it's his apartment and he's got stuff everywhere, and you're literally just trying to fit your life into his.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most effective uses of story in a, like, a quote unquote non-story game I've ever seen, because it made you experience the story versus tell you the story, and it was so much more affecting because of that. And yeah, I just love that game, that experience.
Yeah, me too. And like all of the little things that you notice, and some things that you bring from, from one, let's say, one level to the next, and then
Yep.
the things that you don't like, when you've played it and then you play through it again, and you start noticing, oh, this thing, it actually didn't make the cut into that
Yes.
next level.
Yep.
Also, one thing though that I got a little bit, frustrated with is that, the whole kind of structure where you have this, you have the box, and you don't know what's in it, except for
Yes.
that very thing that you're supposed to put somewhere at this moment. So you have to put stuff, and then you realize, oh, okay, now I have this thing, but I wanted to put this thing there, so now I have to put this thing somewhere else. And then
Yep.
it's a little bit like, it's a little bit of a hassle, and it's kind of part of the experience as well, like the gameplay experience, so to speak.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I also got a bit frustrated by that part. I wanted to
Yeah,
know exactly what was in the box so I could plan
you
properly.
did.
Like,
In a way, though, that felt true to life, because I mean, if you've moved before, you
yeah.
once you put stuff in a box, you probably don't, you're not inventory what's in the box. So when you just want to
Mhm.
get it in the box and get it out. When you arrive at your new place, you're discovering what you put where, and then that's, which is why you've got, I think I remember in one level I was unpacking the kitchen and I came across a slipper or her bra or something. It's like, what is this doing with the dishes? Well, she just threw it in there, I guess, because she was tired of packing. I mean, like, that's, like, to your point, that's frustrating when it
Yeah.
happens in the game, but at the same time, it's rather true to life when that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, it is, and I love that you mentioned this game, because it kind of, it so quirkily fits into like this triad of these three games: Animal Well, and Unpacking, and Thomas Was Alone. Because the thing with Thomas Was Alone as well is that, there is a gameplay, and if you wouldn't have the story, the gameplay would have been kind of boring, but it isn't boring thanks to the
Hmm.
story. And with Unpacking, you don't have a story, quote unquote, like not any exposure anything. It's not something like on your nose, but there is a story if you just if you just look close enough, and it gets part of your gameplay. And I think everyone will experience this very differently as well. Just the fact that, oh, so okay, so now she's graduating, or now she's but it will kind of resonate with us very differently.
Yeah, and there's something magical too, the discovery that the game has been telling you a story the whole time that you didn't realize, and retroactively you're like, oh, the reason I started with a little girl's room is because she was a little girl at the time. And, then she went to college, and now she's a professional. She's working. I believe she was a doctor or something. I can't remember exactly, but there's things in the game to indicate like what she went into.
Yeah,
and
there's
it was
some
very magical
certificates
discovery
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, diplomas and things I think you put on the wall.
Yeah.
So, but it was a kind of magical discovery, almost like discovering a secret area in a game, because it was like, this has been there the whole time, and I'm only now like becoming aware of it. And that those kinds of discoveries are kind of what makes video games so magical. It is discovering those things, and in this case, it's the story discovery, and which is just as fun as discovering a secret area or a new weapon or anything else. I love that game. I had a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, and I think the interesting, and this also kind of, it ties back to the question you posed earlier, especially when you mentioned Baldur's Gate, because with Unpacking, nothing is imposing anything on you, except for the fact that the items are curated. But that's perfectly fine, because again, it can resonate very differently with you, and you can experience this in very different ways. And also, like, there's nothing else that gets in the way of this experience and the sort of the narrative, so to speak. With Baldur's Gate, though, and those kind of things, those kind of games with role-playing games where you're supposed to kind of tailor your own character, those doesn't really sit well with me. Like, generally speaking, I have played, I think I actually told you in sometime probably in our email conversation that I've always loved the idea of Baldur's Gate, but I never actually enjoyed playing Baldur's Gate. Like, I played a lot of like the first Baldur's Gate. I never really played Baldur's Gate 2. And I haven't tried Baldur's Gate 3 yet, but I played a lot of like the original Baldur's Gate, because I loved the idea of it. But I couldn't really, like, something didn't sit right with me. And I think part of it is investing, kind of like, okay, I'm going to choose one class now, and I'm going to have to stick with it, sort of. Also, like, yeah, you're this person now, you're not the other person, like that's kind of how it's tailored for, okay, you are going to play this role, and these other persons, they are just they're just there for you, kind of. And that's the difference with, for example, Final Fantasy, where obviously there's always a main character like Cloud Strife in Final Fantasy 7, but you're so invested in all of those characters, and you can play very differently. So you can relate to all of them. You can relate more to Tifa than you do Eris, or is it Aerith in? It was Eris in Europe, actually, but I think it's Aerith in.
I think it is Aerith, yeah.
In the remake, yeah. I'm so used to saying Eris from all those years, but that kind of that wasn't really compelling to me, and also. I played another very hyped game not that long ago, maybe 2 years ago or something. It's Disco Elysium, if you've heard of it. Yeah,
I have heard of it, yeah.
A very story-driven game, but also the mechanics is, you create this kind of character with different skills and different abilities and so on and so forth, which definitely kind of it affects the gameplay quite heavily. And then it has this dice roll thing. I hate dice rolls in video games. It makes no sense. Like, it makes sense in real life, like playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, but it doesn't make any sense in a video game. I hate that mechanic. It's one of my most hated mechanics in video games. But also with Disco Elysium, I wasn't really that into the story, so that was a turn off right from the offset. Kind of like, okay, this story isn't really like, I mean, sure, it's well written and so on, but I don't find it very fascinating. But then
Mhm.
also like this kind of mechanic. So I've only played it through once, and I have thought about, okay, maybe I should just give it another go, like create a completely different character. I did enjoy the whole thing where you have these different personalities that actually speak to you. That's really funny.
Mhm.
It's a funny thing, and I would kind of like to try it again with a completely different personality, but it's not enticing enough that I would say, oh, this is a great game. It's like, it was a good game. I played it through, and I moved on, kind of.
Mhm. I think just listening to you talk, I do think you probably would like Baldur's Gate 3 because it's an unlike the first and second game. I've played all three of them. I still haven't finished 3. I'm still working on it, but it's story driven, and it's the kind of story driven where the choices you make in the game has impacts on the world in the way of like a Witcher 3 or something, where you're making choices and they're going to have ramifications for good or bad, and you're going to find out at some point. In addition, you have a party that you can assemble around you, and they have personalities, and you can talk to them, and you can romance them, and all those kinds of things are in play. And you can play your character however you see fit. You can be the good guy, the bad guy, or in between. It's interesting because I love playing the game, but I drifted away from it a little bit in the last month or so because I started gravitating toward older games. Specifically, I
Mm,
started playing the original Legend of Zelda. It's funny we're talking about the story stuff. When you think of the Legend of Zelda, you think, like you were talking about earlier, you think about lore, you think about
mm.
story, you think about big story moments. But in that first Legend of Zelda, there's like none of that at all. You There's very little exposition. Occasionally, you bump into an old guy who gives you a sword or some cryptic advice. But otherwise, you're just exploring the world, and you figure out the story as you go. And this is one of those things where maybe when the original game came out and you had the game manual to explain what's going on and why, you would know. But
Mm,
playing it now in 2024 without the
mm.
material, the game is called The Legend of Zelda, but you don't hear about Zelda or see her until you rescue her from Ganon at the very end of the game. So
Yeah.
it's kind of funny that, but at the same time, I really loved it. Like
Mm,
there was none of the, in any modern role playing game, there's always this inventory of quests that you are pursuing. There's a checklist. These are the things I've done. These are the things I still need to do. And to some extent, gameplay becomes about checking those things off. Well, in The Legend of Zelda and then in Final Fantasy 1, which I'm playing right now, there's none of that. Like, you find things in the world and then you have to remember that I somebody told me to go here, or I should try this to progress the game. And to some extent, the story then becomes about progressing the game, getting to the next level, defeating that dungeon, whatever. And you're just doing it because you're playing a game, not necessarily because an NPC told you should do it, and now you have a quest, thing you need to complete. And it's such a 180 versus something like Baldur's Gate 3. And I don't, maybe it's a midlife crisis, I don't know, but I found it so refreshing that I could just sit down and play Legend of Zelda for an hour or 30 minutes and just enjoy the experience, and just know that, okay, well, I've got I have 7 hearts. I'd like to get 8 hearts, or I'd like to defeat dungeon 5, and then like that's it. I'm going to be done at that point and I'll move on. Versus when I'd come to something like Baldur's Gate 3, a lot of times it felt like I have this weight on my shoulder because I have all these quests I need to progress and all these choices and things that sometimes it just, you can almost feel the weight of those decisions on your back that kind of impede the gameplay, I guess I'd say. And it's just interesting that I've
Yeah.
kind of fallen into this retro vibe, and it's making me reevaluate things, I guess.
It's so many interesting things here. First, I'm also replaying Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy. So we're gonna have to talk a little bit about that in a minute or so.
Yes.
But also with you replaying the original The Legend of Zelda, that's a lot of kudos to you actually, because I've tried and I couldn't kind of just because of. Just because of the graphics and the and the crappy sound and that
Yep.
I didn't really give it an honest try either. Like the Legend of Zelda, that was one of the oldest memories I have of playing a video game, like besides
Mm-hmm.
the first Super Mario.
Mm-hmm.
I played it, extensively growing up, and A Link to the Past was for a long time, my it was even top three for a long time. But then I
Yep.
revisited it when I was an adult, and I couldn't really that play it either because of the gameplay. Like it didn't resonate with me, and it's a little bit kind of it almost feels like a paradox saying it because we've been talking so much about the story driven stuff and the lore, and just like you say with the original Legend of Zelda, there's not much story. There's very little dialogue, and the dialogue is like, it's dangerous to go without it or whatever.
Yep.
It's very kind of it's not much, but you can still see, like, in the game, that there is a lot of attention to detail that has been put in there, and there is a very clear idea of this world. It was just that there were so many limitations, but I think that really it shines through in these kind of games where Koji Kondo, the composer, and Shigeru Miyamoto, who created the Legend of Zelda, with the story, like everything is just it's so perfect. It fits so perfectly together. So you can, like, it shines through that there is an overarching idea, like
Mm-hmm.
an overarching theme. So lots of lore, but not much exposition, sort of. And that's in some ways, like there are other examples of games or game series which should, I feel like, these should resonate with me, like Mass Effect, for example. I think Mass Effect
Mm-hmm.
has a great story. It's very well written, and I like a lot of aspects of the game. But after I finished it, I started with Mass Effect 2, and then, like, I don't enjoy this. I didn't enjoy playing Mass Effect 1, and I do not enjoy playing Mass Effect 2. So I'm just gonna stop because there was
Mm-hmm.
so much, repetitive stuff, going to these planets, and you know, you're driving some sort of, I don't even know what it is, some kind of vehicle. Everything looks the
Yep.
same, and you attack these bases. It's the same base everywhere. Like, so there are so many things that is, to me, it breaks the immersion. And those are primarily game mechanics. It's actually the same thing in The Last of Us. I love The Last of Us, the series. I was a little bit disappointed with the finale, but I love
Mm-hmm.
the Last of Us series. I didn't really enjoy the game because the only thing I did enjoy with the game was the story. But then
Yep.
there was all of this gameplay, which was just, it just got in the way, and it broke
Yep.
immersion. Like, one
Yes.
thing I really didn't like was the fact that you are this guy, like, yeah, an older guy, older dude, and a girl, and you're killing hundreds of people. It's like, but how? Like, how is this
Yeah.
even possible? Like,
Yes.
you're sneaking around with a bow and a a sniper,
Yes.
whatever, and you're just killing a bunch of heavily armed dudes. It's like, why and how? And, like, this isn't really why I wanted to play The Last of Us.
Yeah. I never actually finished the game. I think I might have beat the dam level or something. I was probably around the 3/4 mark when I stopped, and the only reason I wanted to continue was for the story. Like, I was enjoying the story of the game. Like we
Mm.
talked earlier about playing for the cutscenes. That was a game I was playing for the cutscenes. I wanted to see the story progress. I wanted to see what happened. But the gameplay always felt, anytime you're kind of a third person shooter, those are always a little awkward, and the controls were clunky in that game. Yeah, I'm glad we got the HBO series, because that was about the story, and they did a great job with it, and I'm excited for the second season. But to your point, that was a game that where the story shined and the gameplay just didn't match up. And the result is, like, a lot of people love the game, but I couldn't totally buy into it. I never finished it. Conversely, when we were talking about the original Legend of Zelda, that was a game clearly where they made the game and then they were like, we need to put some story around it to explain what's going on, because it's all about the gameplay and the story was an afterthought, and it works in that case. But it is interesting that when I mentioned earlier, there's always that tension between gameplay and story. And I think the timeless games, the ones that we remember, typically are for the story reasons, not for the gameplay reasons, but they still have to be good and fun games to play.
Yeah.
Which is why, when I don't know what my top 5 games are, because I think about this a lot. Like, what are my top 5 games? I think Red Dead's in there somewhere because it's a story that I'll never forget, and the experience of playing through it is memorable in a fun way. I enjoyed playing that game. I imagine I'll have to do this at some point. I'll have to figure out my top 5 games, but I bet that most of them will be games in which story was a huge component, because it's the story you remember more so than anything else.
Yeah, and I think it's quite telling because I completely agree with you. And even though there are some games, obviously Super Mario Bros. 3, for example, that's a great, like, that's a kick-ass game.
Great game. Yes.
Very little story. Another one I can think of that is I'm not sure exactly where to put it, but probably somewhere in like top 10, at least top 15 would be Portal or Portal 2.
Portal, yes.
Portal 2 is, and that's the I don't remember much of the story. Like, the story is fun, and Gladys is very fun.
There's no cake. That's no cake. That's the only thing I remember about the story.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's not really the point. Like, the point is the game itself is so it's so groundbreaking. It's so breathtaking in every aspect. So it doesn't really matter that there isn't that it even fits with a quite silly story, which is also like kind of tragic comedy, but like more like dark humor. It wouldn't really, it wouldn't fit with a super tragic drama. Like, it's like meh, but still a very memorable game just because of that weird mechanic. That's like, wow, and it's even like, why didn't I think of this?
Yeah, true.
Like that kind of thing. There are, like, in some ways where like the game is just, the game mechanic or the core concept of the game and the gameplay is so great that it doesn't matter if you have the story. But those are, at least from my point of view, those are quite few, because if you don't have that, what is it you have? Then you have like a sports game, and like sports games can be great. Like, you love Tecmo Super Bowl. I've read all of your pieces about it. I have no idea what this game is, because it's about American football, and I'm a European. Look, I'm a Scandinavian, so I don't even understand the rules of American football. So it's like, how do you win? I don't know. But that's kind of that, and that's also why I'm not I just refuse to play any Souls-like games. I refuse to play Elden Ring because I'm not fascinated at all by the story. And since I'm not fascinated or interested in the story, I'm not going to play it, because it's like, oh yeah, this is just a game I'm going to have to be good at. And I don't want to be good at this game. I can just be good at FIFA or be good at, I don't know, whatever, NHL 24 whatever. It's kind of that's the equivalent for me. It's like getting good at Guitar Hero. I did get good at Guitar Hero. It was really fun. Like, I loved Guitar Hero, but it's not like, oh, another Guitar Hero. Yeah, that's the greatest game in the world. Like, I'm gonna super hype this or whatever. To me, it's I can't really. This might be a bit controversial, but I can't really see the difference between a Souls-like and a sports game. It's the same to me.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. It's all about, the Souls games, they're about getting better through grinding the levels. Like, you're slowly, in some ways, it's almost like a purer form of gameplay, because you're becoming a better player because you are suffering through the experience of playing the game. The original Super Mario Brothers, there's no save points or anything. The only way you beat that game is by getting progressively better at the game. So in some way, the Souls games are a more pure form of gameplay, because it's all about becoming a better player of that game. Like you, I kind of bounced off of them because I didn't like kind of the masochistic nature of that. I don't have an unlimited time to play games, and there wasn't enough for me to grab onto from a story structure or story standpoint to make me want to do that, to spend that time grinding it. I'm going to bring up Skyrim now because I think this is a great example. I do love Skyrim, but this isn't just me talking about Skyrim to talk about it, because I think this is a divide. You and I disagree about Skyrim, and I can kind of, now that we've been talking, I think I see why. For me, when I play Skyrim, I play it as almost as like a Dungeons and Dragons experience where I'm in this open world and I'm making my own story. I'm gonna go where I want to go. If that castle on the cliff looks interesting, or I want to climb that mountain, I'm going to do those things, and I'm going to create my own story from that experience. The downside to Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls games is because they're so open world, there isn't a driving narrative. They kind of just dump you in the world, and then you just find the story as you go. I look at that as a plus, but at the same time, main quest in Skyrim sucks. It's really bad, and that's not a selling point at all. So like, if you're coming to Skyrim to play through the story, you're going to be disappointed because the story is not very good. The story for me is is your own experience playing the game. It's fighting a couple giants, and then a dragon swoops in and joins the fight, and now there's this three-way fray. Like, it's those emergent moments of gameplay that come up that I enjoy. And for me, part of that too is just the gameplay cycle, I guess. I just enjoy like the way you level and stuff like that. I know you feel different about it. I'd love to just get your take on Skyrim.
Yeah. So full disclosure here, I haven't played much of the Elder Scrolls series, like generally speaking. I did kind of dip my toes into the first ones. I don't even remember the names, but Morrowind, is that the third or something?
Morrowind was 3. Yep, Oblivion was 4.
Yeah, and Oblivion, the thing I got excited about with Oblivion was that I watched a trailer where you swung the sword in first person view. I'm like, wow, swinging a sword in first person, like, that's nice. And then I played Oblivion. It's like, yeah, this was quite underwhelming. It wasn't really that great swinging a sword in first person, so I didn't really get into it. But I think the thing about Sky, because I've tried playing, also because there is the whole kind of FOMO thing with games, especially when a game is when it's hyped, or when it's people kind of saying with, like, I did try playing Elden Ring for like 10 minutes, like, no, I'm not gonna play this, this is crap to me, like but I and also kind of I kind of like the thought about Skyrim, but to me it also boils down to, you have these games, like if you look at Red Dead Redemption, for example, I tend to differentiate between games that are mature, or try to be mature, and games that try to be realistic. And to me, Red Dead Redemption never tries to be realistic. There's a lot of suspension of disbelief in play there, and it's they make it so that it really works, but it never tries to be realistic. And I wouldn't really call Red Dead Redemption realistic, like in any aspect, but it's very mature kind of. So like, you can look at Red Dead Redemption and Skyrim and say, yeah, like, these are in the same ballpark, but to me they aren't. They are in completely different ballparks. And to me, Skyrim, it looks to me like a game that tries to be realistic. So when I get into this world, I immediately get sort of thrown out of the world, just by like, but this isn't realistic. Like, the kind of the first dialogue, like, or I don't quite remember, you're in a dungeon locked up, and then you get
Skyrim starts with you're on a wagon going to your execution.
That's the wagon. Yeah. You're getting transported on the wagon. Yeah, true. Yeah. But like it's the whole dialogue, and then I'm just, okay, I'm in this town, and I talk to people, and they say really weird stuff, and like, it's something is just, it's a little bit, I kind of I can compare it with Kingdom Hearts, because I
Mm-hmm.
love the idea of combining Final Fantasy and those kind of Square Enix RPGs with Disney. I love the concept. But
Yep.
whenever, and I've tried playing Kingdom Hearts several times, but it's something with the world, like the graphics and the physics and everything, that's just, it throws me off completely. And I'm like, okay, so in that sense, it's the gameplay, it's the mechanics that doesn't fit me. It's something is weird, something feels off.
Mm-hmm.
And with Skyrim, it's like the interactions with people and the interactions with the world, something just feels off. And I'm like, I get put off for some reason. And I think also in some ways, I think that if I would just try to get over that hurdle, like if I would just give it a few hours, but I haven't really been able to. I haven't been able to get over that hurdle. It's off-putting, so I kind of I shut down.
Yeah, I think you're totally right though, because there is Skyrim excels, I think, because they do a nice job of putting like a veneer of reality over everything, but it's like paper thin, because once you start interacting with it, you're right. Like the NPCs, which are numerous, they don't act in believable ways, and there's only a couple of dialogue options, and so the reason I enjoy it so much is because I kind of just ignore all that and I just interact with the world as opposed to the artifice of the world, I
Ah,
guess. Like I'm just
yeah.
enjoying the narrative, the emergent stuff that arises from exploring, and kind of just in my head crafting or grafting my own story onto like what's happening and why it's happening. So for me, it's almost more like, I think when you talk about role playing games, there's really two different varieties. There's the like Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls games, even the Fallout series, where your protagonist is a blank slate, and onto which you can project your own personality and play it however you want. And then there's the role playing games where your character is already defined. They have a personality, and you're just controlling them in the world. And for me, I enjoy more, because I like Dungeons and Dragons. Probably, I enjoy more the experience of taking a blank slate and just kind of making that person who I want them to be, and then just exploring. And like I said, I make up in my head, sometimes I make up stories about, oh, this is why this happened, because there's nothing in the game that tells you those things.
Hmm.
It's definitely I'm curious to see what the next Elder Scrolls looks like, but it's definitely a gap in the current version and in previous ones.
I I really like when you say that you come up with stuff like on your own. I like that as well, and I kind of do, but in a different way. With, for example, with Zelda, where I'm theorizing, but
Mm-hmm.
it's more theorizing of what something might mean, more than coming up with a narrative of a very specific NPC or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe a bit different, but still kind of comparable.
Yeah,
So I would probably give Skyrim yet another try sometime.
just don't blame me
you
if you
know,
hate it, because it is
yeah,
an
no,
acquired
that's
taste. It definitely is an acquired taste.
just wanted to kind of tie into, because one thing that just struck me when it comes to creating kind of these narratives, and like you say, with the way you kind of interpret Skyrim and the way you see the world building of Skyrim, is that you can kind of impose yourself on that world and create stuff. It's kind of it's a bit similar to or comparable with Minecraft, but Minecraft is probably more so, because everything is just voxel based, and you kind of have to impose a lot of things because there's so much left out. And
Yep.
another kind of the third one in that kind of triad would actually be The Sims. I did this
Sure.
quite funny thing with Sims 3, where I created my friends. Basically, I created like, it was four four characters, and I made them like spitting images of my friends, and I tried to give them these personalities that would reflect them. And
Mm-hmm.
then then I put autonomy to max. So I just put them in a house, and the autonomy to max, and then I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna see what they do. And then I actually had a blog about this where I basically wrote it or followed what they did. Like, oh, today they did these crazy stuff, these crazy things. And it's also kind of, and in that sense, also with Minecraft, you have this, the mechanic actually allows you to add something that probably wasn't really intended. Like, it's not, I don't think they intended for the Sims to be a soap opera, but you can turn it into a soap opera just by, by taking advantage of the mechanics and just doing crazy stuff. I love that also. It's really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do want to talk about Final Fantasy 1. This maybe is a good place to wrap up, but I do want to talk about Final Fantasy 1 because by happenstance, by the fates, whatever you want to say, we're both playing through it. This is the first time. I think this is the first time I've ever actually played through Final Fantasy 1. My first Final Fantasy might have been 2 or 3. But so I've been on this retro kick, and I'm replaying the first one, and kind of like my experience with The Legend of Zelda, from a storytelling standpoint, there isn't a lot there. You maybe are the light warriors, it seems like, because you're 4 heroes, people think you're the light warriors, and you just go around solving problems and going from one corner of the map to another. And for me, I want to get your take on this, but for me, the game has been a lot about, it's really about the gameplay. You're exploring the map, going from one side to another, getting lots of random encounters, figuring out that, so just recently it's still early days for me. I think I'm level 11, but I got the crystal, so I took it back to the witch because I remember she needed it, and then she gave me the herb for the prince, so I went back to him, and then he gave me the key, the mystic key, so now I can open all the doors that I've encountered that I couldn't open previously, and so now I'm excited to go explore again and find everything. That's a game where it's really all about the gameplay for me, and the story is there to give you something to do, I guess, versus being something to engage with. And I'm enjoying it, but I'd love to hear what your take on playing it has been like.
Yeah, it's just a small detail. When you say Final Fantasy 2 and 3, do you mean 2 and 3 or do you mean 4 and 6?
4. I mean 4. Yeah.
Okay.
Good distinction.
That's super super weird. Also because, like, especially since the first Final Fantasy was released in the United States as Final Fantasy 1, but then Final Fantasy 4 was the next one, and that was Final Fantasy 2. And then they skipped 5, and then so Final Fantasy 6 was Final Fantasy 3. But then, when it was time for Final Fantasy 7, they decided, let's just call it Final Fantasy 7.
Let's just call it 7, yep.
But anywho, yeah, so I played 7 was my very first one. So I played like 7, 8, and 9, and then I started backtracking. So I started with Final Fantasy 6, and I got, I was blown away again. Like Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 6 are the only ones who have, completely, been mind-blowing to me. But then I started backtracking, playing 4 and 5, and then I did 1, 2, and 3. And those was, when I did this like 10 years ago or something, it wasn't super enjoyable, especially Final Fantasy 2, like the original Final Fantasy 2, because it has a really weird combat and leveling system where, for example, if you want to level the defense, you have to actually take hits in order to level defense. So if you're like me, I like to grind a bit in the, like, early on. I did it again, but now when I'm playing Final Fantasy 1, the original Final Fantasy 1 again, I did some grind, like a few hours of grinding, just to be slightly overpowered. So I can just, breeze through stuff. You can't really do that with Final Fantasy 2, because then you would have no defense and you're just going to die, But with Final Fantasy 1, yeah, I totally agree with everything you say. The story, like, there is a story, but just like with any NES game, it's very rudimentary. And but again, just like with the original The Legend of Zelda, it shines through that there is this overarching concept, and that there's probably hundreds of pages of script somewhere, in an office, that they had this idea, but then there were so much, limitations that they basically had to cut out a lot of the dialogue and so on and so forth. The thing that really struck me was that I'm a huge fan of Nobuo Uematsu, the composer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a composer myself. I'm an amateur composer. Not professionally, but I've been composing music and played in bands and whatever since forever. So, and he's one of my top 5 composers of all time. And what struck me was that there were a lot of these melodies and pieces that, like, oh wow, this was actually part of the original. Yeah, that I totally forgot about that. Like it's really, it's so grand. Like some of the pieces in that game is like, wow, this music has, it has no business being in this game. It's too great. Like the music is too great for this game.
Yep.
Kind of. So I've been very, like, I wouldn't say distracted, but bedazzled by the music in Final Fantasy 1, because there were lots of details that I basically just mixed it up with everything. To me, it's like, oh, Final Fantasy, so much great music. It's obviously so it's outstanding. So I would never, obviously I would never mistake a Final Fantasy 7 piece with a Final Fantasy 6. They're so distinguished.
Sure.
But those early ones, 1, 2, 3, yeah, I would say 1, 2, and 3. Those are there are a lot of things there where, like, oh yeah, sure, it was actually part of this, like, even here this early. But what I do enjoy is the turn-based the turn-based combat, because I'm not a really big fan of the modern combat in JRPGs, including Final Fantasy Remake and Final Fantasy 7 Remake and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. Like, it's it's sort of enjoyable, but I like the traditional combat, and it doesn't really matter if it's turn-based or if it's the active time battle with the gauges. That doesn't really matter, but some sort of turn-based, I really like that. And the different kind of strategies. Another thing, I had also kind of forgotten how sophisticated the whole system with the jobs and leveling of those were, because they are, like, especially considering the game was released in, what was it, 86 or something,
86 or 7,
yeah. So but yeah, like you say, the story is kind of, there's a lack of story. There's a gap there. It's quite rudimentary. Another funny thing, though, Garland, like, he's a kick-ass villain, I would say, despite the fact that the story is quite lacking. He's a kick-ass villain. I love him. I still love him.
This almost like ties back into what I was saying about Skyrim. The funnest parts I've had in Final Fantasy has been things that have emerged through my experience of playing the game that no one else maybe would have experienced. So, case in point, there's that cave. I can't remember what it's called. The Marsh Cave, maybe something like that. It's just
Marsh Cave,
okay. So I went to that cave. I went there 3 times, I think, and it was like progressive. Each time I got progressively farther because I was low levels. I didn't do a ton of grinding, so I was going in. I'd get my butt kicked, and I'd flee back. Well, the last time I went, I got down into the 3rd level, and I found everything I needed to find, and I was doing great. I had all my characters, and then I had a random encounter with, I think, 3 zombies and 3 geists, and they just worked me over. Like, I got paralyzed and got down to 2. I was down to 2 characters, and then at that point, I was out of healing potions. I was out of cabins and tents. I had no way to heal. So from then on, I was just fleeing for my life to get back to town, and that became my favorite memory of the game so far. Was just like just hobbling along, trying to get back to civilization, praying not for any more random encounters, or at least like wolves or something that I could beat, or something I could run from. And then on the way back home, both my guys got poisoned. So now you're on a ticking clock, because every time you move, you're losing health. And so I limped back into town with like almost no health and managed to survive. And it was a super intense experience though, because I mean that was the game, and that became part of my character story. Like in my head now, it's like my fighter and my black mage, those are the guys that survive. So for me, those are my MVPs because they crawled back to civilization and basically they saved my game, and so I didn't have to start over basically with the last save. So that was like one of those things that arises in, I think, maybe some of the older games that you wouldn't really get in a more modern game. That was just, I was white knuckling it for like an hour trying to get back to town because I did not want to start over.
But it's really like also because, you know, since you have played other Final Fantasy games that are like slightly different, like the fact that in some, especially the newer Final Fantasies, where you get poison but it doesn't stick, like
Yes.
you don't have, you only have it for that particular fight, and then it's
Yep.
you know, or even, you know, a character dies, and then they stay dead for the next fight, while
Yes.
in you know, in the more modern games, they are alive but they have like 1 HP or something, you know,
Yes.
those kind of things. And it's really, it's also that's at least to me, that's part of the experience also with playing now Final Fantasy 1, because I have the baggage of all of the other games, although they are newer, so I know what they have, and then like, oh, so I don't have this here, or it works like this in this game. Oh crap, like totally thrown off, because, you know, I had different expectations, and it gets kind of that's also part of the experience. Also, it's so I really like seeing all of these little details where, oh yeah, sure, this is actually like this is part of this, you know, oh, this name is the same as that name in Final Fantasy V, or, you know, oh, this town is actually here, or whatever. All of these different kind of details, or even the origin of some of the enemies, where you can like backtrack it all the way. So that's the cool thing also about Final Fantasy, because like every Final Fantasy except for those lousy, you know, X2 and whatever, don't like them. But all, like in the main series, all of them are compartmentalized, so they are standalone. Completely completely different stories, completely different characters. You know, even the fundamental mechanics in terms of leveling systems, all of that is just thrown out, you know, from game to game. But they still have these details, and a lot of them, that still makes it a Final Fantasy. And that's also why, you know, Final Fantasy 7, which deviated quite a lot from the earlier, like even Final Fantasy 6, but you know, it can do that because it's still like Final Fantasy 7, also Final Fantasy 8. Those two deviates very, very much from the earlier games, but they still have enough of these details that still makes it a Final Fantasy.
Yes.
And that's actually what I'm enjoying the most. Like now when I'm playing Final Fantasy 1 again, I can't say I really enjoy the game just as a game, but
Yeah.
I enjoy it as a piece of history.
Yeah,
Sort of.
absolutely. You can see the lineage of of the other better Final Fantasies in Final Fantasy 1. And there is something fun about just experiencing the first one again and seeing, you know, some of the, like you said, the poison. Like that was a rude awakening to me. For a minute I didn't realize it was going to stick with me after the encounter, and then I was like, why are my guys almost dead?
Yeah,
It's
and why
because I'm
is
still poisoned.
and when you're walking and it's like blurring
Yes.
the every
Yes.
step, like every second step is like blurred, like, oh my god, now it's almost like physically, you can physically feel how the HP is just draining every single step.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's been kind of just on this whole, I've been on this whole retro kick, and it's been fun revisiting these games from my childhood that I haven't played in probably 30 years. as someone who's played games their whole life and has followed the progression from 8-bit to we're like in kind of photorealistic games now, it's fun going back to those old games in which the story and gameplay is first and foremost, and then story is, if there is story, it's just there to kind of, it's really weak scaffolding. It's kind of there just to maybe explain some of the gameplay, and I'm finding that I'm enjoying it. I guess it doesn't. I go to video games as a way to relax.
Mm.
As that's a hobby. It's something I want to do to relax. And like I was talking about with Baldur's Gate 3, games like that, sometimes it's hard to play those because there's an emotional heft to them, and it's a commitment that you don't get out of the older games. And right now, at this stage of my life, or at least in this season of my life, I'm finding that I kind of just like the games I can just pick up and play. I'm sure that I'll go back to the more story focused ones. And if I just continue the path I'm on, I'm going to be playing Final Fantasies and Zeldas, through the process. So I'm going to encounter that naturally. But it's been fun, I guess, in a way I didn't expect. And there is still story there. So I get
Yeah.
a little bit of both, but it's really been about the games.
And I guess also one thing, at least one thing that strikes me when I'm playing Final Fantasy One now is that it, like the whole series, it stays very true to itself. It stays very
Mm-hmm.
true to it, like the overarching concept or theme. And this is also something I've been thinking a lot about when it comes to adaptions, movie or series adaptions of video games, like what constitutes a good adaptation of a game. And I'm like, generally speaking, I'm very apologetic when it comes to adaptations of video games. Like, I even enjoyed the Warcraft movie. Like, I didn't think it was. It's not a great movie, maybe not a good movie either. But like, it was enjoyable to me. It's like it's fine. But I think like the most important aspect is like whether or not the adaptation stays true to this overarching theme and the world building. So to me, it doesn't really matter if an adaptation stays true, quote unquote, to the original story or manuscript. And to me, it kind of goes both ways. So I really liked the Walking Dead games produced by Telltale
Yes.
Games.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why, like, these are super simple. Also, again, speaking about story driven, kind of almost like interactive novels, where you
Mm-hmm.
basically, there's a lot of dialogue and you make options in the dialogue, basically. But the thing I really liked about it was that they understood what The Walking Dead is all about. And like, is it about zombies? No, it isn't actually. It's about relationships and betrayal and
Mm-hmm.
coping with
Yep.
uncontrollable change. And it's like, it's more about the survival of what it means to be human rather than just the survival of the human species. So that's also like why I love the Fallout series, for example. I think it's
Yes.
by far the best series of 2024, at least so far. And it's just because it stays very true to like the theme and the concept of Fallout. If it doesn't, if you have an adaptation like, you could say, Street Fighter, for example, really crappy adaptation, where it doesn't really stay true to what it's all about. And it's kind of, you can apply that to a game series as well. Like the series itself, it progresses, it evolves. Legend of Zelda has evolved quite a lot, comparing the original with Tears of the
Mm-hmm.
Kingdom. And the same with Final Fantasy, like comparing Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 16. But it stays very true to the overarching theme and the overarching, like, what is this all about? What's the concept? And it's, as when a series starts deviating from that kind of overarching thing, that's basically when they fail. And I think it's the same with the adaptation. So I found that common denominator in like series within the games and also adaptations.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is interesting to me. It's always been interesting to me that they'll make a movie or a TV show that references the game, that looks like the game, but they'll like totally jettison the story points. So in the case of, I don't know if you watched any of the Halo series, but
Unfortunately, yes.
okay, it's a disaster. And the
Yeah.
unfortunate thing is, it looks great. It, like, Master Chief looks great, the Spartans look great, the Covenant looks great, everything looks great. but then they throw out the story, and the story for Halo, like the first Halo game, is awesome. Like it's just adapt that like word for word, and you would have had a great series. But instead, they take the shiny parts and ignore the story. When really, what we enjoyed about playing that game, I mean, the gameplay was great, no doubt, but the story is what you remember. You remember the level, the flood level. Like you cannot forget that. I wanted to see that in a series, and we don't get that because they decided to do something totally different, which I can respect. But at the same time, I don't understand why you would adapt something like Halo if you're not going to honor the lore and story that we've already established.
Yeah, and that. It's kind of it's so incoherent. In some way. It's
Yes.
like, oh, we have to do something because we have to do it differently because it has to be different, but it doesn't have to be different. Like
Yeah.
in some cases, just like with we talked about The Last of Us earlier, it stays very true to the story in the game. Sometimes it's kind of laughable because it's almost frame by frame, and
Yes.
I suppose you've seen these, like the YouTube videos where they compare
The comparisons.
with the game,
Yeah.
and sometimes, but it doesn't really matter because like they realize that the thing about The Last of Us is it's not just the characters and the world itself, it's the characters and the world and the story, all of it fits together. So it makes more sense to do something with that story than trying to tell something else within that world. And it's you can if we compare it with Fallout, which takes a different route because it makes perfect sense. Like the story is, it's kind of in the Fallout. Like, also disclaimer, I've mainly played the first two Fallout, like Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. I know a lot of lore about Fallout, and the newer Fallout, but I haven't played through Fallout 3 or any of the new ones, but I've read a lot about it because I'm really invested in the story. But in that case, they understand that, okay, so it's not any of these stories in any of these games. That's not really the point. That's not what we have to stay true to. We have to stay true to the world building here. Those are kind of standalone parts, but like interconnected, but they aren't as sort of incorporated into a whole as The Last of Us. I can't see how they could have done it any other way with the Last of Us. But with Fallout, it made perfect sense to do something else, and it's kind of almost like they apply the Fallout kind of tactic on Halo. But that's completely insane. Why would you do that? That's not the thing.
And I think too, this ties into, so Fallout and the Elder Scrolls Skyrim are made by the same developer, and they make a certain kind of game. They make a game, like I mentioned, in which you kind of can project yourself onto the protagonist and you just do whatever you want. There's a story there to give you a reason to do what you're doing, like to get at least give you initial shove out into the world, but you can ignore it if you want. Halo's not that kind of game. It's a story on rails. Like you go from one level to the next. The story's going to unfold the same way every time. So adapting those two projects should be very different. And it is interesting that Fallout really, there is no unified story to Fallout. The story of Fallout is the world and kind of the backstory of how the world got there. And they totally nailed that in the series and stayed true to that, which is why it's such a great series, I think. And then in Halo, they had a story that they just jettisoned and ignored, and instead gave us great looking, visuals and stuff. It's interesting, and I do have, as a lifelong gamer, I've always been frustrated when we've gotten adaptations because they've always been less than they should have been because they were made by studios that didn't really understand the games, essentially, is always what it felt like. I think finally with The Last of Us and with Fallout, and those are the two top of mind ones right now, but at least with those two series, we're getting examples of great stories in a film or TV series that respects and pays homage to the original while still being its own thing. So it gives me hope for the future.
I'm gonna throw in League of Legends Arcane
Arcane,
into the mix
that's
as well.
a great series too. Yep,
that's a really, really good one. Some others that didn't, like Dota, as we say in Swedish. I don't know
Mhm.
how, but
Dota.
yeah,
That's how we say it here.
Dota in English. Yeah,
Dota. Yeah.
Dota. Yeah. So that wasn't a great one. I still kind of, I still watched it. I watched is it three? I watched the 3 seasons, but yeah,
Mhm.
not a great one, but quite optimistic as well. And I'm really looking forward to The Last of Us.
Yes.
Season 2. The thing
Yes.
I didn't really enjoy about the first, like as I said with the finale, I was hoping that they actually would do something different than the game, because I think the game is a bit laughable. Like it's this one man army versus heavily
Yeah.
armed dudes, and like it's just they're just lining up to get killed. That's it. But why? Well, this is so weird. But yeah, having played The Last of Us Part 2, we're in for a treat with season
Yes.
2. So
Yes. I'm super excited.
kind of terrified when it comes to The Legend of Zelda. I don't know if you've heard. But,
I've been waiting. I mean, I heard that they're doing something for it. I'm nervous because, speaking of bad adaptations, and this is, I believe Zelda is going to Netflix is doing Zelda, right? I believe it's what I heard.
I'm not sure actually which
Okay.
studio,
For some
but
reason, I thought it was at Netflix, but I'm having like a bad reaction just because I'm still kind of stinging from Amazon's adaptation of the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power.
yeah.
It's really bad fantasy. So fantasy is hard to get right, and HBO made it look easy with at least the first 7 seasons of Game of Thrones, and with House of the Dragon, they make it look easy, but it's not easy, and I'm a little nervous that Zelda's going to get ruined.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, like The Witcher also stands as an example of how difficult it is
Yeah.
with
Yes.
fantasy. Like it's not a bad series, but it's not a great one either.
Yep.
I dropped out in season 3. It just kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
First season was okay, but then it's
Yes.
it's difficult. Fantasy is difficult.
Yeah. And it's funny because it really shouldn't be, because good stories should be good stories. Good storytelling, it shouldn't matter what the milieu is, or the fact that people are carrying swords instead of guns. Like, good stories are good stories, and they focus on characters. And I think that's what Game of Thrones did so well, is they made us care about the people and the characters, and the fact that there's dragons and ice zombies is just like, that just made it more intriguing. Not because the show didn't focus on them; they were just there as part of the world, but really the story was about these people and kind of the dynastic squabbling over power and all that stuff. And then there's fire breathing dragons, and there's magic swords, and there's ice zombies, and like that's the fantasy side of it. I think a lot of these series, they put the fantasy first, and that's where they really fumble it.
Yeah, there needs to be a lot of things, especially stakes. Like you need stakes. The stakes need to be high, and that's what Game of Thrones did. Also, speaking of literature, that's what he did with the books as well.
Yes.
That the stakes are so high from such an early outset. So, and that's probably what many storytellers do poorly, or kind of the mistakes they do is that they don't kill people off because that's the ultimate way of showing that there are
Yes.
stakes here.
So I read the books years before I saw the series,
Yeah, me
and
too. Me too.
I was traumatized when Ned Stark died. I couldn't believe it because he's the hero of the book. I'm like, no, this is.
Yeah.
I even read the next couple chapters expecting a fake out, like, oh, he's not really
Yeah.
dead, and it gradually dawns on you that he's actually dead, and that was it was a paradigm shift in my head, because I didn't know you could kill the main character story, and
And
the
then
story keeps going on.
yeah, and then it just gets worse.
Oh yeah,
It's,
the Red Wedding,
it
like,
just
yeah.
gets, yeah, and it's kind of what I like with The Walking Dead as well.
Yeah.
I love
Yep.
the Walking Dead comic book. I actually did love the Walking Dead TV series as well, up until, I don't know, season 7, and then I kind of but
Yeah, I got out in season 4 just because you could kind of tell that it was going to be the same thing, like always. I did enjoy the first few seasons because there is something magical about a story in which it doesn't feel like it feels like nobody is safe. Like anything can happen. I wish more stories would do that, because when you know characters are safe, you know they're not going to die, you can't suspend your disbelief, because then you're just like, okay, well, the good guys, like the same thing. I just wrote a story about how Robert Downey Jr. is going to come back to the MCU, so to play Doctor Doom. So in all these superhero movies, which I love, you always know the good guys are going to win. Like even when Thanos wins, you know the good guys are eventually going to win. So you're just watching to see how it happens, and there are some surprises along the way, but at the same time, that's the kind of story that they are, for good or bad. And I like stories in which I'm surprised because, like I didn't know that you could kill the main character, like we were talking about with Ned.
Yeah. I mean, I actually must say I loved Infinity War, and I almost didn't want to see Endgame, because I was like, yeah, this is perfect. This is the perfect end. Like everyone dies, kind of, or like perfect end. It would have been from like how I thought about it back then. It was like, wow, this would have been so bold if this was how they left it off, and then like what happens now? Like just trying to get on with stuff, get on with life after this kind of event, and then they just did this whole undoing. And I like Endgame as well, but it kind of destroyed the whole thing with Infinity War. Like I was so like, wow, I was so devastated after Infinity War.
Absolutely.
And then Endgame, okay, you just spoiled it, kind of, sort of.
Yep.
But like the good thing though, I read your piece about Robert Downey Jr. returning, and the good thing is at least that he isn't returning as another Iron Man, because that would have been, the cop out of all cop outs, sort of.
Yeah. Yep. It would totally have undone everything in Endgame. So you're right. At least I'm curious to see how they'll tie him in. I still kind of question the wisdom of it. I understand why they did it. I'm excited that he's coming back, because he is a great actor. He just won an Oscar for a reason. So he's a great actor, and the MCU could use more of that. But at the same time, I don't know. The MCU is a whole different topic. It's, talking about storytelling and suspension of disbelief and all that stuff. They could learn something from good video game adaptations, what you do and don't do, and how to keep your audience engaged.
Before wrapping this up, I'm really curious to hear, like cycling back to Final Fantasy 1, will you continue with Final Fantasy 2, or are you just gonna jump to a completely different series? Or
so that's a good question. My plan that I kind of just stumbled into, because I'm enjoying it so much, is once I finish Final Fantasy 1, I'm going to probably replay Link to the Past, which I haven't played in 30 some years, and for a long time it was my favorite Zelda game. So I'm super excited to revisit that. And then I think I'll probably ping pong between Zelda and Final Fantasy for a while, because it's been fun replaying them both, and I love those games for a reason. I loved them like as a kid. So to answer your question, I plan on playing Final Fantasy 2 and then on from there. But I think I'll probably bounce between that and Zelda, like replay Nintendo 64 Zeldas, and just go down memory lane and relive some of those experiences, because they're all great games, and you kind of forget. We talked about how what you remember about these games is the story, but you kind of forget after a while that they're actually really good games. They're fun games, and they're part of the reason we enjoy the story so much is because we were entertained by the gameplay, and it's been eye opening that these games. Like good gameplay is timeless, and it doesn't matter how long has passed. Like if you can look past the ugliness of the games, because 8-bit technology is not the best looking games, and the rudimentary gameplay, like there's something there that you can grab onto and enjoy, and that's where I've been. So I plan on doing Final Fantasy 2 and onward from there, depending on how far I get into the series. I think I probably need to have you back on just to talk about Final Fantasy and compare notes on that.
Oh yeah, really excited.
Good. Yeah, and maybe Legend of Zelda, or at least A Link to the Past, because I'm really excited to play that one. Like I said, for a long time it was my favorite Zelda game, maybe my favorite game ever. So I'm really excited to replay it and just see how it holds up. I'm a little nervous because of what you were talking about, your experience replaying it.
I mean, I would still say it is a really great game. It's just that to me, it's always kind of difficult returning. It's the same in some cases with returning to movies you enjoyed when you were a kid. It might just either it kind of, I would never say that it can't ever ruin the experience you had back then, but it can kind of taint it somewhat. And the positive thing is, I don't think when I returned and tried to play A Link to the Past again, it didn't taint anything. Like, I still think it's a great game. It's just that it's a little bit of a hurdle to get into it, because you're used to like all the modern stuff. You're used to a certain way of playing a Zelda game with all the all of those kind of good things that come with with evolution, sort of. But I still, it didn't taint any of the memories, and I still believe A Link to the Past is a great game. So I don't think you need to worry that much.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I was going to play it regardless, but yeah, when you mentioned that, I was like, hopefully. Then again, like, I was the first hour or so that I played The Legend of Zelda, the original. I wasn't sure I was going to stick with it because it is a little clunky and you're just kind of wandering around. You have no direction. You are literally directionless until you find the first dungeon, and then and it kind of picks up from there. But initially I was like, yeah, I remember this. Like, the music's kind of fun, and when you find a secret, like that little sound effect is awesome. But I wasn't sure going to stick with it. But then at some point, it just something like clicked, and I was like, yeah, I have to beat this game now. Like, I'm addicted to it. I want to see it to the end. Henrik, do you have anything you want to plug? Where can people find you and your writing, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's mainly medium.com. I'm a bit kind of a chameleon, because I'm a product manager by trade. I used to say I'm a product manager by trade and a nerd by heart. So it's lots of the stuff I write about is has to do with product management and those kind of things, like work related. But then I can't not write about games as well. So I've written a few very lengthy pieces on The Legend of Zelda, for example. I'm currently working on a piece on Animal Well. We'll see if I ever finish it. I tend to. I'm a pretty slow writer. But yeah. So medium.com and LinkedIn.
I will mention. I don't know if I've published everything you wrote about video games, but I know at fanfare.pub we've published several of your pieces. They've all been outstanding. I've loved them all. So if you just go to fanfare.pub and search for Henrik's name, you'll find the articles he's published there. He's published several on Zelda. I know you've covered a couple other games too, but I've loved them all. They've been great pieces. So I would recommend people check them out. I will, in fact, in the show notes, I'll put links to the Legend of Zelda pieces, because those are definitely relevant to our discussion today, and I think listeners will enjoy reading them.
Nice, thanks a lot, Eric. Those
absolutely,
yeah.
Thanks for coming on, Henrik.
Thank you, Eric.
You can support the pod, $3 a month. You'll unlock access to over 30 exclusive articles that are available nowhere else. By the way, you can do that at allthefanfare.com. If you like the pod, make sure you leave a review, leave a rating. Head over to newsletter.allthefanfare.com. The pods are posted there. That's on Substack. You can leave comments. If you want to comment directly about something I say on the podcast, that's where you can do that. Until next time, peace out.